Grace Sullivan, 24, worked part-time as a waitress at a small-town diner in rural Idaho. She lived with her mother in a modest flat, still grieving the sudden loss of her father earlier that year on Christmas Eve. The diner was nearly deserted. Most of the regulars had gone home to their families, leaving only a few quiet souls in search of warmth and comfort in cups of coffee and slices of festive pie. Just before closing, while the staff was already wiping down the counters and counting out the till, the bell over the door jingled. An old man entered from the snowy evening, wearing a thin coat and battered shoes, his long silver hair draped past his collar. No one gave him much notice. "We're closing in 15, the manager called out without lifting his head, his tone making it clear he'd rather not serve another guest. Grace paused, then stepped forward. "I'll help him, Joe. It's Christmas Eve." The manager exhaled sharply but gave a reluctant nod. Grace led the elderly man to a booth near the window, where colorful lights from the nearby shops cast a soft glow across the table. "What can I get you, sir?" she asked, notepad in hand. "Just some soup, if there's any," he replied, his voice a gentle rasp that hinted he didn't speak much. "And maybe some water." Grace slipped into the kitchen and returned with a hot bowl of potato soup, larger than usual, and the last gingerbread cookie from the counter, decorated in red and green icing. "I added the cookie," she said, placing it down. "No one should go without a treat on Christmas." "Eve," the man's worn hands wrapped around the steaming bowl. "This is very generous of you." "I don't have much to offer," Grace confessed, "but letting someone go without a meal on Christmas, well, that wouldn't sit right." He ate slowly, deliberately, relishing each bite as though it were a rare treat. His eyes, clouded with age yet somehow still sharp, occasionally scanned the diner, picking up details others overlooked. When Grace returned to collect his empty bowl, the elderly man looked up at her with a gaze so intense it made her pause. "You know," he said, his voice little more than a breath, "you remind me of someone who once saved my life." Grace blinked, taken aback. "I'm sorry?" He leaned in closer and in a voice meant only for her, whispered 7 words. "You are your father's daughter in every way." A shiver passed through Grace. Her father had passed just 10 months prior, a quiet, modest man who seldom spoke of his time in the service. How could this stranger know anything about him, or her? Before she could ask, the man stood, placed a carefully folded $5 bill on the table, far more than his meal had cost, and gave a solemn nod. "Merry Christmas, Grace Sullivan," he said, and turned toward the exit. "If you believe good people should be remembered, stay with us." Grace remained still, eyes fixed as the old man stepped out into the softly falling snow. How did he know her full name? She hadn't worn a name tag that evening, and she definitely hadn't introduced herself. She hurried to the door, but by the time she pushed it open, the man had disappeared into the darkness. Only footprints in the fresh snow confirmed he had actually been there. When she returned to clear the table, she noticed a small folded note beneath the check. "Thank you for making the right choice. Some debts take a lifetime to settle," that evening as she helped her mother decorate their modest Christmas tree. Grace brought up the odd encounter. "He knew my name, Mom, and he said I reminded him of someone who once saved his life." She hesitated, thinking he said, "I'm my father's daughter through and through." Her mother's hands froze, a glass ornament hanging in midair. "What did he look like?" Grace described the silver hair, the aged face, the intense eyes that seemed filled with years of stories. "And how old would you say he was? Late 70s? Maybe early 80s? Her mother slowly sat down, the color draining from her cheeks. "Grace, that description matches exactly how your father used to describe his commanding officer from his time in Germany, but your father rarely spoke about his service, said it was classified. No one ever really knew what he did there 3 days after Christmas. While Grace worked the early shift, a man in a dark suit stepped into the diner. He scanned the place with trained precision before walking up to her, Grace Sullivan. He asked, his voice quiet and formal. "My name is David Mercer. I'm with the Veterans Affairs Special Recognition Division. Could I speak with you in private in the empty back room of the diner?" Mercer revealed a faded photograph encased in a plastic sleeve. It depicted a young American medic dragging an injured soldier through what looked like a forest clearing. Both men were covered in mud, and worse. The medic wore a noticeable red cap beneath his helmet. This photo was taken in 1972 near the East German border, Mercer explained. The medic hauling his wounded comrade to safety is Private James Sullivan, your father. Grace touched the picture with shaking fingers. She had never seen this image, never known this chapter of her quiet father's past. The man being saved, Mercer continued, was Colonel Robert Campbell, one of our most crucial intelligence agents during the Cold War. After he recovered, he led several vital missions before vanishing mysteriously not long after his 1989 retirement. Official records mark him as missing, presumed dead. Grace's pulse quickened as the pieces came together. The man at the diner was Colonel Campbell. Mercer gave a nod. That's our belief. He's been living off the radar for decades, for reasons still classified. But facial recognition from the diner's security footage confirms it's him, the first verified sighting in nearly 30 years. But why would he visit me? Why now? Grace asked. Colonel Campbell made a vow after your father rescued him. He swore to always watch over the Sullivan family to repay the life debt one day, Mercer said after a pause. We believe he's been observing your family quietly for many years, waiting for the right time. Grace recalled something her mother had said after her dad's death, how a mysterious donor had paid her father's medical expenses during his final illness, how scholarship opportunities had appeared just when she'd needed them. When he learned of your father's death, Mercer went on, we believe he chose to make one last appearance to hand over the torch of gratitude directly to you. Grace felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The simple kindness she had shown a lonely old man on Christmas Eve hadn't been a random act of goodwill. It was the fulfillment of a promise made long before she was born, a full circle of compassion finally coming to completion. Type yes if you've ever believed that kindness may take time, but is never truly gone. 3 days later, Grace found herself being guided through the checkpoints of a military site she hadn't even known existed in her state. The concrete structures appeared ordinary from the outside, intentionally plain, but the tight security and respect shown toward Mercer hinted that this was no typical facility. Inside a windowless briefing room, a uniformed officer with Silver Eagle insignias greeted her. Miss Sullivan, I'm Colonel James Whitaker. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. His handshake was firm, though brief. What I'm about to disclose is classified, but under these circumstances, we've received special clearance. He activated a wall-mounted screen displaying a Cold War-era map of Germany, with multiple red markers. Your father wasn't just a medic, Miss Sullivan. He served with a highly specialized recon unit operating near the Iron Curtain. The night captured in that photo when he saved Colonel Campbell took place during a mission that helped prevent a possible nuclear conflict. The full details remain sealed, but the result influenced history. Grace tried to connect this new truth with the quiet man who'd taught her how to fish and helped her with math. He never spoke of any of this. He wouldn't have, Whitaker replied. Those missions demanded complete secrecy even decades later. What we can say is that Colonel Campbell made a promise that night as your father carried him through enemy territory despite 3 bullet wounds in his own leg. Whitaker slid a folder across the table. Inside were papers showing routine deposits into a trust fund under Grace's name. Modest college scholarships she had earned, even the odd insurance policy that had paid for her father's final hospital bills. Colonel Campbell vowed to safeguard your father's family by any means needed. He's been quietly keeping that vow for decades. Grace's fingers shook as she flipped through pages documenting a lifetime of discreet protection she'd never been aware of after hearing about your father's death. Campbell apparently chose to make one last personal gesture. Whitaker's tone softened slightly. He wanted to see James Sullivan's daughter in person to be sure his obligation had truly been met. But why show up as a vagrant? Why not simply introduce himself? Campbell still has adversaries. Even now, his instincts make him blend and evaluate situations before showing his hand that became a second nature. Long ago, a junior officer entered whispering something to Whitaker, who nodded with solemn understanding. Miss Sullivan, there's someone who wishes to speak with you. He turned on a monitor mounted on the wall. The face that appeared was older than she remembered from Christmas Eve, dressed more formally, but clearly the same man she had offered soup to Grace. He said, his voice now firmer, more authoritative. I regret the performance at the diner. Old habits are hard to break. Colonel Campbell, she responded. Your father saved far more than just my life that night in 72, Campbell. Said the intel I was carrying stopped a military misstep that might have sparked full-scale war, millions of lives. Miss Sullivan, that's what your father safeguarded. He never got public thanks because the operation stayed secret. Campbell's eyes, with that same intense stare she remembered, seemed to pierce the camera straight into her core. When I saw you give food to someone who looked like a homeless stranger on Christmas Eve without hesitation or prejudice. I recognized it immediately, the same quiet bravery, the same natural compassion. James Sullivan's spirit lives on perfectly in his daughter. Grace couldn't hold back the tears streaming down her face. There's one more thing, Campbell added. The trust fund created for you has matured. It'll fully support any education you decide to pursue, whatever direction you choose. Your father once mentioned your dream of becoming a doctor. That door is now open to you. Military personnel gave Grace time alone to take in the news. When she stepped out of the conference room hours later, she held her father's service medal, awarded posthumously and hand-delivered by Campbell's representative, along with a letter detailing the education fund created in her name. The media never uncovered the complete story, but within military networks, a secure video began to circulate. Nighttime footage from the diner's security camera showed the aging Campbell bowing before a small photo of James Sullivan, which Grace kept tucked in her wallet. The timestamp read 11:52 p.m., Christmas Eve. A week later, the Veterans Support Foundation reached out to Grace with an offer to serve as an ambassador for their winter outreach programs. The role came with a stipend and flexible hours that would support her new medical school plans. That spring, Grace received a parcel containing her father's red medic cap, the very same one from the 1972 photo, with a simple note inside, "From one Sullivan to another. The legacy lives on." When Grace returned to the diner, it wasn't to wait tables. It was to sponsor a new annual tradition, a complimentary Christmas Eve dinner for veterans and anyone spending the holiday alone. Have you ever made the right decision when everyone else turned away? Your story matters too. The following Christmas Eve, Grace stood before a vacant table at the diner, gently setting down a plate of gingerbread cookies beside a framed photo of her father. Beside it sat the red medic cap, placed as if its invisible owner was joining the celebration. The diner, typically closed by evening on holidays, now radiated warmth and liveliness. Every seat was occupied. Elderly veterans, struggling families, and solo travelers, each sharing a festive meal. The Sullivan table, as it came to be known, stayed symbolically unoccupied every year. A young boy, recently placed into foster care after losing his parents, approached shyly. Grace smiled and motioned toward the empty seat. "Would you like to sit here?" she asked softly. "My dad always said no one should eat alone on Christmas." The boy nodded, eyes wide, as he examined the photo and the peculiar red cap. "Was he a soldier?" the boy inquired. "He was a healer," Grace said, "someone who helped others when they needed it most." As the night went on, Grace moved from table to table, making sure everyone felt included. She paused as the bell above the door rang and Mercer stepped in, giving her a respectful nod. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a short message in a familiar hand. "The circle continues. Well done." Grace instantly understood. Somewhere in the room, perhaps Campbell himself was watching, or maybe just one of his trusted people. The specifics didn't matter. What did was the steady thread of kindness reaching forward to a new generation. Some presents aren't wrapped in ribbon yet. They hold the weight of a whole lifetime, and now and then a simple meal offered at the perfect time becomes the spark that awakens a long-sleeping gratitude as snow drifted gently beyond the windows. Grace watched the circle of strangers turn into something deeper. A community, however brief, tied together by a shared sense of humanity and the quiet understanding that no one should face the night alone. Her father would have smiled at that. Have you ever done something small that rippled far beyond what you imagined? Share your moment, because kindness only needs the right heart at the right time. Follow for more unforgettable stories where we honor the truth that what's right, no matter how small, is always worth remembering. Don't you have anyone to spend Christmas with? Her voice shook a little as she set her hand on the chilled table. The elderly man only nodded once, his eyes still locked on the tiny plastic tree sitting in the middle of the empty diner. She nudged a piece of cake toward him. Then let me be your first tonight. He searched her face for a long while, then leaned in close and said 7 words, 3 days after she got a phone call from DC and life was never the same again.